Her hair was still wet when she lied to me. She always showers before she cheats. I noticed that pattern around the third month. Always the same mint shampoo scent, the same way she towel dries just enough to leave her ends dripping on the kitchen tiles, the same oversized blazer she claims is from the office lost and found. And always that look. Like she rehearsed something in the mirror and forgot the last line. "I've got a private meeting tonight," she said, scrolling through her phone like it owed her something. "Client stuff? Late one." I nodded like I believed her. Like I hadn't already checked the calendar app, synced to her cloud. There was no meeting. There was never a meeting. The hotel was a 3-star pretending to be a 4. Room 237 had wallpaper peeling like her excuses and a mini fridge that hummed louder than her voice did during our last 3 arguments. She booked it under her real name. No effort. She thought I wouldn't look. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't want to know. But I was already parked across the lot when she arrived. Watched her step out of her car, purse clutched like a secret. I should have left then. Should have driven home and set her clothes on fire or cried into a cold pizza. But no. I waited. Watched. At 8:12 p.m., a man walked in after her. White shirt, no tie. The kind of man who smells like cologne he can't afford. The kind who smirks too much and talks with his hands. I stayed until the lights went out upstairs. I didn't rage. I didn't storm in. I went home and did laundry. Washed her blouse. Folded her yoga pants. Sat on the floor for 20 minutes, just staring at the blinking microwave clock. Then I packed. One backpack. No farewell note. No petty messages written in lipstick on the mirror. I unplugged the Wi-Fi. Canceled our Amazon Prime. Transferred the last of my freelance payments to a new debit card. Left my wedding ring in the freezer, right next to the frozen berries she never used. By morning, I was gone. Left the car. Took the bike. Rode until my legs went numb and the road felt like a different country. She went to her private meeting, so I disappeared by morning. But here's the thing. She doesn't know I saw. She doesn't know I knew. And she definitely doesn't know that I wasn't the first one to disappear because of her. But that part's coming. Because when I left, I didn't just vanish. I went somewhere she never thought I'd go. Back to the place where her first lie was born. I didn't go far, at first. I stayed in a town I hadn't thought about in years, where people hang wind chimes not for decoration, but to hear something move in their lives. The motel I checked into had no key cards, just rusted keys and front desk mints that tasted like regret. But it was quiet, and I needed quiet. Not for peace. I wasn't ready for that. But to listen. I was starting to hear all the things I had ignored for years. The silence gave me flashbacks I didn't ask for. Like the time I found her crying in the hallway at 2 a.m., clutching her phone like it was breaking her hand. She said it was bad news from her sister, but her sister called the landline the next morning and asked if we were still coming for Easter. That was 3 years ago. Back then, I still believed in coincidence. Back then, I still believed in her. She texted me the morning after I left. Not, "Where are you?" or "Are you okay?" Just, "Did you take the charger from the bedroom?" That was it. No emojis. No concern. Like I was a missing sock. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That text told me everything I was still trying not to accept, that I had become background noise in my own life. Static. I remembered something strange while lying on the motel bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. Something from a year ago that didn't make sense back then, but burned with clarity now. We were at a neighbor's barbecue. She excused herself to take a work call, but her phone was still sitting on the picnic table. I noticed it because I was pouring her lemonade and saw the screen light up. A name. One I didn't recognize. Grand M. It meant nothing then. I told myself it was a colleague. I never asked. Didn't want to seem controlling. God, I was pathetic. I let her build a second life while I vacuumed our bedroom every Sunday and thought that was love. I opened an old backup drive I hadn't touched in months. It was mostly work files and tax documents, but buried deep in a folder labeled House Docs was something that didn't belong. A scanned lease agreement for an apartment on Holloway Street, signed in her name and someone named Grant Mercer. Not a work thing. Not a mistake. A lease. 2 years ago. That's when the nausea hit. I realized something worse than cheating had happened. This wasn't an affair. This was a duplicate life. A duplicate version of her. And I had been the placeholder. The shadow husband she returned to when she needed to borrow normal. I needed to see it. So I biked there, 27 miles. Holloway Street was near the river, where the houses had that freshly flipped look. Hers was gray. Clean. Lifeless. No car in the driveway, but the mailbox had her handwriting. The door was locked, of course, but the neighbor was watering her lawn and waved like she recognized me. That was the worst part. "Hey, Desmond. Haven't seen you in a while." I nodded, smiled. My heart cracked in places I didn't know it still could. Inside that house, somewhere, were answers. I could feel it. I'd bet my last dollar that the inside had no photos of me. Probably no signs of me at all. Just candle holders, thrifted blankets, and someone else's toothbrush beside hers. I went back to the motel that night and stared at her last text again. She hadn't followed up. She hadn't called. She didn't ask if I was coming back. She was probably sleeping in that house right now. In that other life. Maybe he thought she was faithful, too. Or maybe he was in on it. Maybe I was the third wheel all along. That's when I knew this wasn't just about running. It was about digging. If she had secrets hidden in houses, leases, and phones, how deep did it go? Because here's the thing, Maggie's not stupid. She's meticulous. And people like her don't make mistakes unless they want to be caught. And now I had to figure out why. I never expected to return to our garage. It was 2 nights after I found the lease on Holloway Street, and I should have stayed gone. But there was one thing still clawing at me. A cardboard box Maggie told me never to touch. It lived behind the paint cans, under an old comforter we never used. I once tried moving it during a spring cleaning binge. She snapped at me, said it was just old student files. But the box was sealed in packing tape and had a faint smell of lavender, like her perfume, which she hadn't worn around me in over a year. So I waited until she was at her so-called meeting, Tuesday again, of course, and I came back. Didn't park out front. Left my bike 3 blocks away and walked through backyards like a ghost with a mission. The garage key was still where I left it 2 years ago, duct-taped under the recycling bin. She never found it. She never looked. Inside, everything was too neat. Like she had cleaned recently, but not for me. The dust was disturbed in all the wrong places. That was the first sign. I found the box exactly where I remembered. Heavy. Taped. No labels. I pulled it into the corner, sliced it open with the dull house key, and instantly knew this wasn't student paperwork. Inside were photos. Hundreds. Maybe more. All printed. No digital backups. But none of me. Not one. Instead, there were pictures of her with different people. Same smile, same dimples, but different lives. One beach trip with a man I'd never seen before, her hand on his chest. Another photo of her holding a toddler, not ours, at a birthday party. And one where she was in a wedding dress. But that wasn't our wedding. It was in a forest. I'd never seen that dress before. Or that man. I had to sit down. My knees stopped working. There was a journal at the bottom. Small, black leather, worn at the corners. I didn't hesitate. I flipped to the middle, randomly. One entry caught my eye. Tuesdays are mine. Grant never questions them. Neither does Des. They think they've figured me out. But no one really has. I just play roles. Wife. Partner. Lover. I'm none of those things. I'm just passing through their stories. I felt my stomach drop, like a plane falling through turbulence. She wrote about me like I was a character in her personal screenplay. Someone to fill space between acts. And Grant, the man from the lease, he was just the Tuesday chapter. There were others. Names I didn't recognize. Lives I didn't know she'd lived. The scariest part? She didn't seem angry. Or guilty. Just detached. Like none of us were real to her. Like this was all just a game she'd already won. I put everything back and resealed the box. She'd know someone had been there eventually. I didn't care. I wasn't running anymore. But before I left, I took one thing with me. A photograph. The most recent one. Dated 2 weeks ago. Her and another man. Not Grant. Outside what looked like a cabin in the mountains. On the back, in her handwriting, was a single word. Property. That's when I knew. This didn't end on Holloway Street. That lease was just one chapter. She had more places. More people. More stories she was telling. And I was going to find every one of them. I stared at the photograph for hours that night. The cabin behind them looked expensive, like one of those rentals you find deep in the mountains, where you pay more for no cell service and faux rustic charm. Maggie wore a flannel I'd never seen, and the man beside her had his arm casually slung over her shoulder like they'd done this 100 times. He wasn't Grant. He was older, bearded, familiar in a way that bothered me. There was something about the word she wrote on the back, property. It didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a clue. Maggie never used words carelessly. Every sentence with her had a second layer. The ones I understood too late were always the ones that mattered most. I drove out to my brother's place just before dawn. He's a real estate agent in the quiet part of the state where people still leave their doors unlocked and talk about weather like it's news. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since he accused Maggie of looking through him like he was furniture. Back then, I defended her. Now, I showed him the photo. He raised an eyebrow. You want me to look this place up? I nodded. Cabin in the Blue Ridge, maybe. Private land, I think. Just see if anything shows up under her name, or any of the names I give you. I handed him a list I'd written on the motel notepad, Maggie's full name, Grant Mercer, and 3 others I'd found mentioned in the margins of her journal. My brother stared at it like it was a test he hadn't studied for. 2 days later, he called me back. Only one hit, he said. There's a property deed in her maiden name. Not Maggie, Margot. And the co-signer? He paused. You might want to sit down. It was my father's name. The line went quiet for a moment because I didn't answer. My father had died 6 years ago. I hadn't heard his name in anything legal since the funeral. And now it was sitting beside hers on a deed to a cabin in the mountains. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't eat. Just drove. Took every back road, my mind folding in on itself, trying to find a version of this that made sense. When I finally reached the coordinates my brother sent me, the cabin looked exactly like the photo. But up close, it was worse. No curtains. No lights. Empty, like a movie set waiting for the actors to return. The door was locked, but the frame was soft. I didn't need a key, just a little pressure and desperation. Inside, everything was clean, too clean. No dust, no clutter. Just furniture arranged like a catalog. There was a fireplace, unlit. A kettle on the stove, spotless. And above the mantel was a framed picture that didn't match the others. While the rest of the cabin had generic decor, stock photography, blank walls, this one had a photo of my father. Not from our house. Not one I'd ever seen. He was younger, smiling beside Maggie. And in this photo, her hand was on his chest. I dropped to the floor. My ears rang. My head spun. Something inside me cracked, the kind of break that doesn't heal straight. How long had she known him? Before me? Why didn't he ever mention her? And what did she mean by property? I looked at the back of the frame, hoping for a date, anything. Instead, I found something else, a folded map taped behind the cardboard backing. Hand-drawn. 3 red XS marked across it. One had a name written in black ink. Elise. Age 7. I don't have a daughter. Maggie never wanted kids. She told me that from day one. So who was Elise? I didn't go to the police. What would I even say? Hey, my wife might be living 3 lives. Here's a map I found taped behind a photo of my dead father. They'd probably ask if I was on something, and honestly, by that point, I wish I had been. It might have dulled the feeling in my chest. The map had no addresses, just terrain lines and hand-drawn landmarks. But I recognized a spot, a campground from years ago where Maggie once said she got bit by a tick and nearly died. Except we never went camping. Not once. She hated bugs. I drove out there with a half-charged phone and zero plan. It was colder than I expected. Pine trees closed in on both sides of the dirt trail. I felt like I was walking into someone else's dream, or maybe a nightmare she'd left behind for me to find. There was a trailer tucked behind the trees. Old, faded blue paint. Wind chimes on the porch, rusted. A swing set in the back. One seat was broken. I didn't knock. I just stood there, staring, until a girl opened the door. Maybe 6, 7 at most. She had Maggie's eyes. Not similar. The same. I said nothing. I couldn't. My tongue felt stapled to the roof of my mouth. The girl tilted her head like a curious bird. You look like the man from the picture, she said. That's when the door opened wider, and a woman stepped out. Not Maggie, but someone with her voice. Same inflection, same rhythm. Older. Hair dyed black and tied back. And when she saw me, her whole body froze. She whispered one word like it was an answer to a question no one had asked in years. Desmond. I couldn't tell if she was afraid, angry, or just surprised I'd found them. Then she added something that shattered whatever was left of my understanding. You weren't supposed to find this version of me. She didn't open the door all the way. Just stood there, one hand still on the frame like she needed to hold on to something solid in case I lunged at her. I didn't. I was too stunned. The woman in front of me wasn't Maggie, not exactly. Her hair was shorter, dyed darker. Her face was leaner, like stress had carved into it over years. But her voice, Her voice hit me like a punch to the chest. It was Maggie, or a version of her, the one she never let me meet. The girl, Elise, had gone quiet, retreating behind the woman's leg like a shadow returning to its source. She didn't seem afraid, just confused, like she'd opened the wrong book and found a chapter that didn't belong. The woman gently ushered her back inside and shut the door behind her. Then she turned to me, standing on the porch, arms crossed. We stared at each other for a few seconds that felt like a cliff. "You came all this way," she said, not as a question but a resignation. "I thought you'd take longer. You thought I'd find this." I asked. "You wanted me to?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the broken swing. The wind chimes above us barely moved, but they made noise anyway, discordant and off-key. "I left the photo on purpose," she said. "The one at the cabin. You were never supposed to find that place, but once you did, I figured you'd keep digging. I found the box in the garage, the journal, the photo of Elise." My voice shook when I said her name. "You wrote property on the back, like she was part of your collection." Her head dropped, and for the first time, she looked ashamed. Not theatrical, not manipulative, genuinely hollow. Like something in her had finally cracked open, and even she didn't like what she saw inside. "She's not part of anything," she said quietly. "She's not his. She's mine." "Whose?" She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "Your father's." The air left my lungs so fast I nearly sat down on the steps. I stared at her, blinking, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something logical. They didn't. Nothing about this made sense. My father had been gone for years. He wasn't the kind of man who left shadows behind. He was blunt, cold, predictable. He wasn't this. "You're lying." She shook her head. "No, he was the first version. You were the second." It was like trying to listen to a language I used to speak, but had forgotten entirely. "What does that even mean?" I asked. She leaned against the porch railing, like she was too tired to keep hiding. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've lived as 3 women. Margot, Maggie, Mara. Each time I disappear, I don't run. I reset. Different towns, different men, different names. Elise wasn't supposed to happen. But after your father died, I couldn't run the same way. I tried to stay gone, but the pattern kept calling me back. I ended up near you. Near Desmond. You chose me." I laughed bitterly. "Because I looked like him?" "No," she said. "Because you didn't." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I walked in circles on the gravel in front of that porch, trying to absorb the scale of her deception. Years of my life had been spent with someone playing a role. But worse than that, she had done this before. This wasn't a midlife spiral. This was her system. "And Grant?" I asked. "Who's he?" She looked away again. "A fallback. In case you ever woke up." "So what now?" I asked, choking on the question. "What happens to Elise?" "She stays with me," she said instantly. "She's innocent. She doesn't need to know about all this. Not yet." I shook my head. "She doesn't even know her last name." "She knows enough," she snapped. "More than you ever did." I took a step back. That hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the realization that I never truly existed in her story. I was a page filler, a stopgap, a soft place to land between acts. "I'm not going to the police," I said. "But I'm not done either." She gave a half smile, sad and bitter. "You never were the type to finish anything." That one cut deeper than she knew. 2 days passed. I didn't go back to the trailer. I stayed at a roadside in 2 towns over, trying to convince myself that everything I'd learned wasn't just poisoning my memory of her. It was poisoning everything I thought was real. The problem was, I wasn't sure where the lies ended. I didn't know who she had been with my father, or with me, or with that man in the cabin, or even who she was with Elise. But someone else did. The note was taped to my windshield early in the morning, written in shaky block letters with a black marker. "Stop chasing shadows. Meet me where she met him. 3 p.m. There was no name, no address, just a photo paper clipped to it. Old, slightly grainy, like it was taken on a disposable camera. Maggie, in her 20s, standing outside a coffee shop. Beside her, a man that wasn't me. Wasn't my father either. He looked straight into the camera, like he knew it was being taken, like he wanted it to be found. I knew that cafe. It was in my hometown. I hadn't been there since I was a teenager. She told me once that she had passed through there before we met, like it was a coincidence. It wasn't. I got there early. sat in the back with a bitter cup of drip coffee and shaky hands. At exactly 3 p.m., a man walked in wearing a navy jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He sat across from me without asking. Then he pulled out a small black notebook, slid it across the table. "I've been tracking her for 13 years, he said. I stared at him. He looked plain, unremarkable, like someone you'd forget even as you spoke to him. But there was something in his eyes, something hollow. "She used to go by Claire when I met her," he continued. "She said she'd been through some things. We were together 2 years. Then she vanished. No goodbye, no closure. Just gone." He tapped the notebook. "She does this to everyone. And you're not the last." I opened the notebook. Inside were photos, names, addresses, a timeline. Crossed out names. Some with dates. Some with nothing. One of the names wasn't crossed out. Mine. I didn't sleep after meeting the man with the notebook. His name was Evan, and he had the weary eyes of someone who'd lost a version of himself a long time ago. He gave me everything. The notes, the photos, names of 3 other men who were willing to talk. It was all laid out like a pattern Maggie thought no one would ever piece together. I spent the next week connecting the dots, talking to men who, just like me, thought they had been the one. Turns out, none of us ever were. She moved like smoke. Charming, smart, and always just elusive enough to make you chase her instead of asking why she was running. But the truth has a way of sticking when you stop lying to yourself. I didn't want revenge. Not at first. I wanted distance. A fresh start. But then I got a call from Evan. "She's applying for a job under a new name," he said. "Same pattern. Small town. Different state. There's a kid involved this time. She's using a lease to start over again." That's what changed everything. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was damage. And I couldn't pretend to be a ghost while she haunted new people. So I sent everything. The notebook, the photos, the timeline, to a journalist Evan knew. Someone who had already started digging into a case about a woman using false identities to manipulate housing records and financial accounts. It turns out Maggie, or Margot, or Claire, or whatever she called herself, had forged documents more than once. Bank fraud, misused trust funds, loans under names that didn't belong to her. And now, finally, someone was watching. I didn't expect it to catch fire. But the article dropped on a Tuesday, of all days. Local story at first. Then picked up traction online. One of her aliases trended for 6 hours. Not viral, but just enough to burn. I heard from my brother a few days later. "You see the news?" he asked. "She's under investigation. Someone filed a report about Elise too. There's talk of custody hearings. She might lose her parental rights." I didn't answer him right away. I was standing on a dock, watching the lake behind a cabin I'd rented under my real name. No lies. No secrets. Just space. Eventually, I said what I'd been waiting years to say. She finally ran into someone she couldn't rewrite. Maggie disappeared again, of course. That's what she does. But this time, she wasn't just slipping away quietly. There were lawyers now. Deadbolts. Headlines. People asking the right questions. I didn't need to chase her anymore. I stayed gone. I started teaching woodworking in a town that doesn't ask too many questions. I see Elise's photos sometimes, the one I kept from the box, and I wonder how much of her story she'll ever know. Maybe one day I'll write her a letter. Tell her she was never the mistake. Just a chapter trapped in the wrong book. As for me, I'm better. Still bruised, still a little hollow some mornings. But better. She went to her private meeting, and I disappeared by morning. But she didn't realize. Tuesday came for her, too.